I still remember the night my phone vibrated at 2:17 a.m. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost. "You're being watched," the message read. My chest tightened. I typed back, "Who is this?" 3 dots appeared, then stopped. A few seconds later, another message arrived. "You'll know soon." For weeks before that message, my life had already been falling apart, just quietly enough that no one cared. I had lost my job after my business partners accused me of financial mismanagement. Friends I had helped build careers for suddenly went silent. Even my own relatives started treating me like a burden, offering sympathy that felt more like judgment. I was the problem. The failed one. The man people whispered about. That night, though, the fear wasn't about money or reputation. It was the feeling that someone could see me when the world had already decided to look away. 2 days later, I saw him. I was leaving a rundown cafe, counting coins in my pocket, when a black car idled across the street. The window rolled down just enough for me to see his eyes. Calm, familiar, dangerous in a quiet way. He nodded once. That's when I recognized him. 3 years earlier, he had worked under me, an assistant I barely noticed because he did his job too well. I remembered signing his recommendation letter. I remembered trusting him with documents I never checked twice. I also remembered the court hearing where those same documents were used to destroy me. "You!" I whispered. He smiled, barely. "You trained me well." Then the window rolled up, and the car disappeared into traffic. After that, strange things began to happen. The landlord who had been pressuring me suddenly stopped calling. A bank rejected my loan appeal, then approved it the next day without explanation. Articles about the company scandal quietly vanished from search results. People who had blocked my calls started reaching out, just to check in. I didn't celebrate, I watched. I knew revenge didn't come loudly. It came patiently. Over the next 3 months, I played the role everyone expected. The broken man. The cautionary tale. I attended gatherings where I wasn't invited but tolerated. I listened as former partners laughed a little too hard and told stories where my name was missing. I thanked relatives for advice I never asked for. All the while, the unknown man kept watching. Sometimes I'd receive a single message, "Not yet," or "Let them talk." What I didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the man they had underestimated was dismantling their world piece by piece. He had learned from me, yes, but he had also learned from my mistakes. He traced money trails my partners thought were buried forever. He recorded conversations where my family admitted they had sided against me to protect their inheritance. He leaked truth slowly, surgically, to the right people. No explosions, no drama, just consequences. The first to fall was the loudest one. A former partner whose luxury photos filled social media was arrested for tax fraud. He called me from an unknown number, voice shaking, asking if I knew a good lawyer. I let it ring. Then came the others. Accounts frozen, contracts canceled, invitations withdrawn. The same people who once stood tall suddenly bent under the weight of their own lies. And my family. They came last. 3 months after that first message, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find them standing there, parents, siblings, cousins, faces tight with panic and forced smiles. They spoke all at once. Apologies. Misunderstandings. We were scared. We didn't know who to trust. They begged me to help, to speak to people, to fix things. Behind them, across the street, the black car waited. I listened quietly until they were done. Then I said calmly, "You watched me lose everything and decided I deserved it." Silence. "I survived because someone else was watching," I continued. "Now it's your turn to live with what you chose." They reached for my hands. I stepped back. The door closed gently, but the sound echoed louder than any shout. Later that night, my phone buzzed one last time. "You're free now," the message said. I looked out the window at the empty street. The car was gone. I wasn't rich again. I wasn't famous. But my name was clean, my future was mine, and the people who once looked down on me now spoke my name with fear and regret. Revenge didn't make me cruel. It made me untouchable. The warning arrived at the exact moment, when life had already stripped me of the last thing I trusted. Certainty. It was late, the kind of late where silence feels heavy instead of peaceful. My room was dark except for the weak glow of my phone charging beside the bed. I hadn't turned the light on in days. There didn't seem to be a reason anymore. I was lying there, staring at the ceiling, replaying every mistake people said I had made, every failure they claimed defined me. Then my phone vibrated, not rang, vibrated. Soft, deliberate. For a second I didn't move. No one messaged me anymore. Not friends, not family, not even people who once needed something from me. I had become invisible, and invisibility has a strange comfort. You stop expecting anything good or bad. That vibration shattered it. Unknown number. I remember thinking it was probably spam, or a wrong number, or one of those automated messages offering loans I no longer qualified for. Still, something in my chest tightened before I even opened it. A quiet instinct whispered that this wasn't random. You're being watched. That was it. No greeting. No explanation. Just those 3 words sitting on my screen like a threat that didn't need to shout. I sat up slowly, the room suddenly feeling too small. My eyes moved to the door, then the window, then back to the phone. My heart began to pound, not fast, but heavy, each beat landing with intention. Watched how? By whom? And why now, when there was nothing left worth watching? I typed back with shaking fingers, asking the most useless question a frightened person always asks. Who is this? The reply didn't come immediately. That silence was worse than any answer. I imagined someone on the other side staring at my message, smiling, deciding how much fear to give me next. I checked the locks. I pulled the curtain aside just enough to look outside. The street was empty, soaked in yellow streetlight, quiet in a way that felt staged. Then the phone vibrated again. You'll know soon. That was when fear stopped being abstract. It settled into my body, cold and steady. This wasn't a prank. It wasn't a threat asking for money or attention. It was a statement, a promise. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound felt amplified. The hum of electricity, a car passing too slowly, footsteps that might have been real or imagined. I kept thinking about the timing. Why now? Everyone else had already finished breaking me. I had lost my job, my reputation, my place in conversations that once stopped when I entered a room. I was already defeated. If someone wanted to hurt me, they were late. Unless that was the point. The next day, I tried to convince myself I was overreacting. People under stress imagine things. Fear looks for patterns where there are none. But as the hours passed, a strange realization crept in. The message hadn't made me feel weak. It had made me feel alert, awake, as if, for the first time in months, something was happening to me instead of ending for me. I started noticing details I had ignored before. A car parked too long across the street. A man in a cafe who looked up every time I moved. My phone battery draining faster than usual. None of it was proof. All of it was enough. What unsettled me most wasn't the idea of being watched. It was the idea that someone had been watching long before they decided to tell me. They had seen the fall, the betrayals. The nights I sat alone convincing myself that disappearing would make things easier for everyone else. They knew my lowest point and chose that moment to speak. That meant something. Fear slowly mixed with curiosity, then with something else, hope maybe, or danger disguised as it. The message hadn't said I was in trouble. It hadn't asked me to run. It hadn't warned me to hide. It simply stated a fact, like a chess player tipping over the first pawn. You're being watched. By the end of that day, one truth was clear: whoever sent that message knew exactly how powerless I felt. And instead of crushing me further, they had planted a thought I couldn't escape. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I believed. Maybe someone had seen what was done to me. And maybe, just maybe, everything was about to change. I didn't recognize him at first. Not because his face had changed, but because my memory had quietly filed him away under irrelevant. He stood there like a detail I had once skimmed over, something unimportant enough to forget. And that realization hit harder than the fear ever had. The man who now held my attention, who seemed to know more about my life than anyone else, was someone I had once barely noticed. It happened 2 days after the message. I was leaving a small cafe, the kind that doesn't ask questions when you sit for hours with one cheap drink. Rain had just started, light but persistent, turning the street into a mirror of blurred lights. I was halfway across the sidewalk when I felt it, that quiet pressure between the shoulders, the unmistakable sense of being observed. I stopped. The feeling didn't fade. Across the street, a black car sat idling. It wasn't flashy. No tainted arrogance. No roaring engine. Just deliberate. The kind of presence that didn't need to demand attention because it knew it already had it. The driver's side window lowered just enough for me to see his face, and suddenly memory caught up. 3 years ago, he had been my assistant. Not the loud one, not the ambitious one. He didn't push for credit or speak in meetings unless spoken to. He listened. He wrote things down. He remembered details other people dismissed. At the time, I thought of that as obedience. Now I understood it was observation. My stomach tightened as recognition fully settled in. You. The word slipped out of me before I could stop it. He nodded as if we were running into each other at a grocery store, instead of the edge of my unraveling life. His expression didn't carry anger or triumph. That's what scared me. It carried control. You trained me well, he said calmly. Those 4 words rewrote my past in an instant. I remembered staying late at the office, explaining how power really worked, not through noise, but through patience. I remembered telling him to always document everything, even when it seemed unnecessary. I remembered brushing off his questions, thinking them naive, never realizing he was building a map of the system while I was busy running it. And then I remembered the courtroom. The evidence that destroyed me had been flawless, perfectly timed, legally airtight. At the time, I had blamed my partners, my lawyers, even myself. Standing there now, looking at the man in the car, I realized something chilling. This wasn't chaos. This was craftsmanship. I didn't think you were capable of this, I said quietly. That was my mistake, saying it out loud. A faint smile touched his lips, not offended, not proud. Amused. That's why it worked. The window rolled back up. The car pulled away, dissolving into traffic as smoothly as it had appeared. No threats, no explanations. Just confirmation. I stood there long after he was gone, rain soaking into my jacket, replaying every interaction we had ever had. Every document I had signed without reading carefully. Every time I had spoken freely in front of him, assuming loyalty was guaranteed by position. I had taught him how the game was played. I just never imagined he'd master it better than I had. Over the following days, his presence made itself known without ever showing again. Things shifted subtly, like pieces being moved when I wasn't looking. The landlord who had been pressuring me suddenly stopped. A payment I expected to be rejected went through. A rumor I thought would follow me forever quietly disappeared from conversation. He never took credit. He never contacted me directly again. That's when I understood the second lesson he was teaching me. Power doesn't announce itself. It lets you notice the results and draw your own conclusions. The man I had once overlooked wasn't seeking revenge in the way people imagine it. No confrontation, no public humiliation. He was correcting an imbalance, adjusting outcomes, rewriting narratives with the same tools I had once handed him casually, thinking I would always be the one holding the pen. And the most unsettling part, he wasn't doing this for me. He was doing it because he could. I had been the lesson. Now I was the witness. As fear slowly gave way to respect, one thought settled uncomfortably in my mind. If someone I had dismissed so easily could rise this far, this quietly, then everything I believed about control, loyalty, and power had been dangerously incomplete, and whatever was coming next, it was already in motion. After that encounter, I understood exactly what role the world expected me to play, and I played it perfectly. I stayed broken. I let my shoulders slump when I walked. I let my voice sound tired, unsure. I stopped correcting people when they spoke about me like a cautionary tale. When someone said my downfall was inevitable, I nodded slowly, as if I agreed. When they offered advice wrapped in pity, I thanked them. I became the version of myself they were most comfortable with, the one who posed no threat. That disguise was my greatest protection. I attended gatherings where my name felt like an inconvenience. Family dinners where conversations shifted the moment I sat down. Old colleagues' events where people smiled politely and avoided eye contact, afraid failure might be contagious. I listened more than I spoke. I laughed at jokes made at my expense. I let silence stretch until others filled it with truths they never meant to reveal. They assumed I was too defeated to remember. They were wrong. I watched everything. The way certain relatives whispered about property and inheritance, as if grief had an expiration date. The way former partners blamed one another when they thought no one important was listening. The way people who once praised my leadership now rewrote history to place themselves at a safe distance from my fall. Every word became a thread. Every contradiction became a knot. At night, alone in my room, I replayed conversations in my head, not with anger, but with clarity. I noticed patterns: who spoke when money came up, who grew nervous when certain names were mentioned, who defended themselves without being accused. I began to see how fragile their confidence really was, how much of it relied on my silence. Occasionally, my phone would buzz. Still watching, one message said. Another night, let them believe it. No instructions, no reassurance, just confirmation that the role I was playing was the correct one. Weeks passed. I remained unemployed, or so everyone believed. I complained just enough to sound believable. I borrowed small amounts of money and paid them back late. I arrived early and left early, like someone with nowhere else to be. The mask was exhausting but effective. People stop guarding themselves around someone they think is finished. That's when the real information surfaced. I learned who had altered documents behind my back. I learned which signatures were forged and which were coerced. I learned that my family hadn't simply doubted me. They had made calculated decisions, choosing security over loyalty, aligning themselves with whoever looked strongest at the time. I stored it all away, quietly. I didn't confront. I didn't accuse. I didn't even react, because reacting would have warned them. There were moments, many, when anger surged so hard it almost broke through the act. When I wanted to shout, to expose them right there, to watch panic replace their smug certainty. But I remembered the man in the car, his calm voice, his patience. Noise reveals weakness. Silence builds leverage. So I stayed silent. I watched people grow careless. I watched them underestimate timing, thinking too much time had passed for consequences to matter. I watched them relax, convinced the story had ended and they had won. They mistook my stillness for surrender. Behind the scenes, things were shifting. I could feel it even without seeing it. Subtle changes rippled outward, decisions reversed, alliances strained, conversations cut short when certain names surfaced. I didn't ask how or why. I trusted the process unfolding beyond my view. My only task was to remain exactly where I was, invisible, harmless, broken. And the strange thing was, the longer I wore that mask, the clearer my mind became. Without the need to defend myself, I could finally see people as they were, not as I hoped they might be. I stopped romanticizing loyalty. I stopped expecting fairness. I started understanding leverage. By the end of the 3rd month, I wasn't waiting anymore. I was ready. When the first crack appeared, small, almost unnoticeable, I knew it was beginning. A sudden phone call cut short. A meeting canceled without explanation. A confident man suddenly avoiding eye contact. The same people who once spoke over me now paused, measuring their words. They sensed it before they understood it, and through it all, I said nothing. Because the most powerful move I made wasn't striking back. It was letting them forget I was still in the game, right until the moment they realized they had never been safe at all. Over the next few weeks, the consequences of their actions began to unfold in ways they never expected. It was subtle at first, like a quiet tremor under the surface, but each ripple carried weight. The people who had laughed at me, the ones who had abandoned me, the so-called allies who had pretended loyalty, they started to feel the first hints of uncertainty, the slow erosion of control they had once taken for granted. Nothing was overt yet. There were no confrontations, no loud accusations, just the beginning of a reckoning they couldn't see coming. The first to falter was the loudest of my former partners, the one whose arrogance had been the easiest to spot. He had flaunted wealth and influence, showing off in ways designed to intimidate. I had watched him closely, noting every habit, every weakness, every corner where his confidence frayed. One morning, seemingly out of nowhere, news broke that his financial empire was under investigation. Tax authorities froze accounts, contracts were suspended, and his public image began to crumble before anyone had a chance to defend him. It was surgical, perfectly timed to hit him where it hurt the most. Social media buzzed with speculation, reporters probing deeper while he scrambled helplessly to explain himself. I didn't make a sound. I didn't celebrate. I watched. Then came the others. Each downfall was methodical, tailored to the person. A former colleague who had undermined me for a promotion suddenly found his key clients walking away. An old friend who had taken advantage of my trust discovered that his secret financial manipulations had been quietly documented and leaked to the right authorities. Even casual acquaintances who had whispered behind my back now faced public embarrassment when the lies they spread were revealed in front of audiences that mattered most. Every ripple of consequence reached outward, touching lives they believed were untouchable. Meanwhile, I remained calm, almost invisible. I attended family gatherings where I was treated politely, even cordially, as if the past months had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. They spoke cautiously, measuring every word, attempting to restore the delicate balance they had disrupted. My presence was quiet, unassuming, my demeanor still that of someone who had lost everything. But beneath the surface, I was aware of every reaction, every glance, every slip of worry disguised as normal conversation. They had no idea how thoroughly the pieces had been arranged. The most striking effect of all was the realization that power doesn't always arrive as violence or confrontation, it arrives as consequence. The people who had once wielded control so easily were now at the mercy of their own choices. Greed, arrogance, betrayal, these traits that had seemed like advantages now became vulnerabilities. Every misstep, every lie, every calculated betrayal was returned to its owner in the quietest, yet most effective way possible. It was poetic, the kind of justice that didn't scream, didn't demand attention, but lingered in every heartbeat, in every phone call, in every email. What made it even more powerful was that it didn't happen all at once. It was gradual, patient, deliberate. Each consequence, each downfall, was given room to breathe, to unfold naturally, so that by the time they realized what was happening, the structure of their lives was already fractured. They began to beg quietly at first, then with desperation. They reached out, attempting apologies, offering excuses, pretending remorse. Some tried to bribe, some to manipulate, some to charm. All of it failed because the leverage I held wasn't just in the evidence, the documents, or the whispers I had orchestrated. It was in timing, in control, in patience. By the end of the third month, the transformation was complete. Those who had once looked down on me, who had discarded me when they thought I was powerless, now approached with humility, fear, and regret. They begged me to help them, to intervene, to restore what had been lost. They promised loyalty, pleaded for trust, and offered everything they once had taken for granted. And yet, I didn't rush to respond. I didn't immediately punish them further or embrace them in mercy. I waited, watching them squirm, watching them recognize the full weight of their own mistakes. Through it all, the presence of the man who had first warned me lingered like a shadow. He never interfered openly, never gave direct instructions, never revealed himself. Yet I knew he was there, orchestrating, guiding, observing. It wasn't just his skill, it was the patience, the discipline, the understanding that real revenge is quiet and inevitable. I had learned from him, and now I was his instrument and his student at the same time. I moved with precision, allowing the universe to return what was taken from me in the form of truth and consequence. And when it was finally over, when the last person had fallen or begged or realized they had underestimated me, I felt something I hadn't in months. Relief. Not happiness, not joy, not satisfaction, but a sense of closure. The wrongs were accounted for, justice had been served, and I had remained untouchable throughout it all. The lesson was clear: revenge isn't loud. It doesn't need witnesses. It's measured, deliberate, and unrelenting. And when executed correctly, it leaves the one who suffered nothing but strength, clarity, and freedom. The people who once held me down, who had laughed at my failures, who had thought my life was over, now understood that the game had always been theirs to lose, and they lost spectacularly. But the real power wasn't in their fall. It was in the calm, quiet, unstoppable patience that had allowed me to orchestrate it all while remaining unseen, underestimated, and unbroken. Theirs was chaos. Mine was control. And for the first time in months, I knew I had truly won. When the final pieces began to fall into place, the people who had once seemed untouchable were suddenly at my mercy, and it was almost surreal to watch. Each person who had turned their back on me, mocked me, or exploited me for their gain was now confronted with the reality that they had underestimated the very person they had tried to destroy. I had never sought immediate revenge, nor had I wanted to humiliate them in front of others. What I wanted was far more profound: justice served quietly but unmistakably, consequences that couldn't be undone, and a reckoning that would make them question every choice they had made. The chaos they had caused in my life was now reflecting back on them, amplified by their own arrogance and ignorance. The first to reach out was the partner who had once smiled in my face while secretly plotting to ruin me. His calls came late at night, tentative and frantic, words tumbling out too fast, apologies laced with fear. He begged me to help, to intervene, to make the situation go away, but I remained silent, letting him stew in the uncertainty he had created. I didn't need to respond. His own anxiety, amplified by the changes in his life, was punishment enough. Every word he spoke, every plea he whispered, reinforced a truth he could not escape. He had been a fool to think I wouldn't notice. wouldn't remember, wouldn't act. Then came the former colleagues, each unraveling in their own way. One by one, their mistakes surfaced, quietly exposed to the very people whose trust they had betrayed. Contracts vanished, reputations fractured, opportunities evaporated. I watched from a distance, letting it all unfold, understanding that real revenge is not in confrontation, but in consequence. It's in the slow, deliberate unveiling of truths that people thought were buried, in the shattering of the illusion that their power was permanent. I had learned patience from the man who had warned me, and now I wielded it like a blade, precise and unrelenting. Family members followed. The relatives who had treated me as a burden, who had whispered behind my back and aligned with the stronger side, suddenly approached me with fear hidden behind forced smiles. They offered explanations, excuses, apologies. They begged for guidance, for help, for forgiveness. I could see it in their eyes. They had finally realized they had misjudged me. They had forgotten that the quiet, broken man they assumed I was had never truly surrendered. I listened, not out of mercy, but out of a strategic understanding of what comes next. Every plea, every desperate word, only confirmed how complete the reversal had become. It was fascinating to witness the transformation in them. People who had once walked with confidence now hesitated. Conversations that used to flow smoothly were interrupted by doubt. Every action was measured, every smile calculated. The same arrogance that had fueled their attacks now became a trap for them, because they could no longer trust their own judgment. They were learning, too late, that power taken through deceit and exploitation is fragile, and the consequences of betrayal can be as silent as they are devastating. I had set the stage, and now they were actors in a play whose ending they could not rewrite. Throughout this process, I remained almost invisible, the calm observer who held the ultimate control. I did not gloat, I did not provoke. My revenge was not a spectacle, it was inevitable. Every fall, every moment of desperation, every plea for forgiveness was orchestrated through patience and precision, like a chess game where every move had been anticipated in advance. By the time they realized what had happened, there was no one to blame but themselves. And in that, I found a strange satisfaction, a quiet affirmation that true power lies not in force, but in the ability to remain unseen until the moment when everything changes. And then the moment arrived when it was all complete. The people who had mocked me, betrayed me, and abandoned me were kneeling metaphorically before the consequences of their own actions. They begged, pleaded, and tried to manipulate, but nothing could alter the truth that had been silently gathering around them for months. The man who had warned me, the one who had taught me patience and observation, had not intervened directly, but his presence had been felt in every ripple of consequence. The final lesson was unmistakable: revenge, when executed with patience, strategy, and restraint, leaves nothing to chance, and the ultimate victory is not just in their suffering, it is in your own freedom, clarity, and unshakable power. By the end of it all, the message was clear to everyone: the man they had once dismissed as broken, powerless, and irrelevant had been quietly orchestrating the unraveling of their world while remaining untouchable. They had begged, cajoled, and pleaded for mercy, but the quiet strength I held was beyond their reach. I had achieved something far greater than retaliation. I had claimed control over the narrative, reclaimed my dignity, and ensured that the people who had sought to destroy me now understood, in the most inescapable way, that every action has consequences, and every betrayal has a reckoning. I had not only survived, I had become untouchable, and the lessons they had learned too late would linger in their minds forever, a testament to the precision and inevitability of true revenge. By the time they returned, I had already stopped being the person they thought I was. The people who had once dismissed me, abandoned me, and treated me with indifference now stood at my door, faces pale, voices shaky, eyes filled with a mix of fear and desperation. They were begging for forgiveness, for help, for guidance, for anything that could undo the consequences of their own arrogance. And I looked at them and realized that this was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment where all the patience, all the silent observation, all the careful orchestration of every move over the past 3 months came together in perfect alignment. I had not rushed them. I had not confronted them aggressively. I had allowed the world to return what was rightfully mine, using their own mistakes against them, letting them crumble under the weight of their own choices. They spoke at once, voices overlapping, pleading, apologizing, trying to explain themselves, trying to claim that they had changed, that they hadn't meant harm, that everything had been a misunderstanding. But I had already seen the truth. I had listened to every word they had spoken behind my back, remembered every slight, every betrayal, and documented every moment in my mind with clarity and precision. I could hear the panic in their tone, the tension in their gestures, the lies that desperately tried to slip past my perception. There was no convincing me now. Their attempts at reconciliation were too late. Their past actions had already sealed their fates, and their present desperation could not alter the inevitability of what they had set into motion. I didn't rush to respond. I didn't shout or threaten. I remained calm, letting the silence do the work that confrontation never could. The most powerful lesson I had learned from the man who had first warned me was that patience and observation were stronger than anger or force. Let them speak. Let them beg. Let them expose themselves in the very moment they hoped would save them. And that is exactly what they did. Every word they uttered, every gesture they made, reinforced the extent of their own miscalculations, the fragility of their confidence, and the magnitude of their underestimation. As they pleaded, I watched the fear grow in their eyes. The partner who had betrayed me financially, the colleagues who had undermined me professionally, the family members who had whispered against me and aligned with whoever seemed strongest, all of them were exposed by the weight of their own choices. Their confidence, once so unwavering, had been replaced by a nervous tension, a recognition that their victories had been built on shaky foundations. They realized too late that the man they had dismissed, the one they assumed powerless, had never truly lost. I had remained strategic, unseen, and deliberate, and now all of their actions came crashing down around them with relentless inevitability. And then came the moment of reckoning. I spoke calmly, my voice carrying authority that could not be ignored. You watched me lose everything and decided I deserved it. You turned your backs, laughed at my failures, and assumed I would stay down. But I survived, I thrived quietly. I remembered everything, and I waited. Now, it is your turn to live with the consequences of what you chose. The words were simple, but the weight behind them was undeniable. It was not anger that fueled them, but control. It was the realization that I had maintained my dignity while they had fractured theirs, that I had reclaimed my narrative while they had been trapped in the consequences of their own arrogance. They tried to reach for my hands, tried to plead for mercy, but I stepped back, not out of cruelty, but because mercy was not the point. The point was that they had to face the reality of what they had done, understand the depth of their own misjudgments, and recognize the power of someone they had once underestimated. I closed the door gently, letting the finality of the moment resonate. It was not a scream, not a dramatic spectacle. It was quiet, deliberate, and permanent. And in that quiet, I felt an overwhelming sense of liberation. Later that night, my phone buzzed one last time. A single message appeared. "You're free now." I looked out at the street, empty, calm. The black car that had first appeared to warn me had vanished. The man who had guided this process had disappeared as silently as he had arrived, leaving me to reap the rewards of patience, strategy, and observation. I wasn't rich, I wasn't celebrated, but I was untouchable. My dignity was restored, my freedom reclaimed, and the people who had once scorned me were left to live with the weight of their own choices. In the end, revenge was not about violence, not about dramatic confrontation, and not about public humiliation. True revenge was in control, in observation, in patience, and in the quiet inevitability of consequences. The people who had once looked down on me, abandoned me, and mocked me had begged me back. And in their begging, they acknowledged, without words, that the man they thought powerless had always been in control. They had underestimated me, and now they lived with the certainty of their misjudgment. I had survived, I had grown, and I had reclaimed my power, and nothing they could say or do would ever change that.